Hey guys, Palsteron here. And today let's talk about how to sustain maps in 3.18. So whenever I make an Atlas guide about how to make currency or how to engage with the new Atlas system, the number one feedback that I always get that is very split is map sustain. Some people telling me they're just over sustaining like crazy. Some people telling me it's okay. And some people telling me they can't sustain at all. What is happening? Now, what I usually find when looking at these people's setups is that everybody thinks completely differently in terms of what sustain actually means. And this can range from people who will always use the map device, throw all scarabs they have at sustaining maps, versus people who don't even chisel their maps. So I thought today, instead of giving you vague instructions on how to sustain maps, I will just get to the point and tell you everything I do to sustain maps, and then you can sort of decide what you do already, what you don't do, what you maybe can take away from this video. But before we start this section, I want to talk about something that I feel like is very, very important. I think in a lot of trade scenarios, sustain is a little bit overvalued. And what I mean by that is, sure, sustain is really, really nice and cozy. You don't have to trade with anybody. But I see people time and time again completely flat out say this strategy isn't worth it. I can't do the strategy because I can't sustain. Or they completely butcher the strategy just to somehow sustain maps, right? They have a strategy about completing maps fast and they can't sustain. And they're like, oh, this doesn't work. Let me throw Abyss in there. Let me throw Legion in there. Let me throw Blight in there. And while then they will be able to sustain, now their whole strategy is basically out of the window because their map takes 3 times as long. The second question you have to ask yourself is how expensive available are the maps you actually want to run? Because let's say you want to run a Caldera strategy for whatever reason, right? And you just cannot get it to work. You cannot sustain. Well, you go to Caldera here and you can actually type in bulk and you will see that there is a plethora of people selling for like 3-4 chaos. And if the whole problem is just a little bit under sustaining your map, then, well, sometimes you're just going to go here and trade with one person and back you're at like 58 Caldera maps. Now, the strategy obviously has to be worth it because now you're investing chaos into actually sustaining instead of it just naturally occurring. So that will have to be subtracted from whatever you already make. But I guess what I'm trying to point out here is that just because you cannot sustain does not mean that your strategy is not viable. And it definitely does not mean that you have to completely butcher your strategy and completely morph it to sustain. But to start out this 3.18 edition of sustaining maps, I think we should start out with 2 of the new biggest keystones that they released that have to do with map sustain. And I'll go over both singular focus and shadow shaping, where they fit and how you can use them to get a ton of maps. Now, the number one problem with these 2 keystones is that both have extremely big upsides, but if you don't know what you're doing with this or you forget something, it can be devastating, which is why we're now going to talk about it, right? So currently I'm doing a strat. I'm going to talk about this in a bit, right? Where I'm running singular focus. And what this keystone does is maps found have 200% more chance to be favored maps, but non-favored maps drop as basic currency instead. Now, basic currency on average is complete, utter trash. So on average, you should just think of the second line as a complete downside. But what use case does singular focus have? Now, first up, you have to realize what this means. Non-favored maps drop as basic currency instead. This does include stuff like Cortex and the other synthesis maps. It also includes Shaper maps, but it can actually still drop Elder maps and it can drop Conqueror maps, but only if those Conqueror and Elder maps are the same as the maps that you have favored. So what is the problem with this keystone overall? Why is this not just a slam dunk in every build, right? Well, the problem is that the way the Atlas works. Now, to make you understand what I mean is we're going to take the Atlas as a whole. We're completely going to ignore the favorite slot for a second. There is 100 different maps on the Atlas. There's also 15 unique maps, right? For a total of 115 down here. Now, we're going to assume the standard case here with 4 watchstones, just so it's a little bit clearer. But basically, you have a weighting of 100 in total, 1 for each of the maps, which means that whenever a map drops, there is only tier 16s, right? Because we have all 4 watchstones. There is a 1% chance to drop any particular map. Now, what a favored slot does is it gives plus 10 weighting to the map that is favored. And this can be done multiple times, up to 12 times if you have the full, if you have it fully unlocked, right? Up to plus 120 weighting. So let's just assume for a second that you did exactly that, right? You took this Mesa and you favored it 12 times, right? That means plus 120 weighting. Now that means that the chance for the weighting for non-Mesa maps is 99, right? Because the one Mesa is subtracted, and you have the Mesa map, which has a weighting of 121 now. So what your favorite slots have basically done is instead of 1% to drop your favorite, to drop the map that you want, you now have round about a 60% chance. Now, if we take the singular focus keystone, that means that if we go to our atlas again, and if we look at this, times free, the weighting, right, will be 121 times free because you have 200% more chance to drop your favorite map, which comes out to a weighting of 333. And if we put that into a calculator, now instead of a 60% chance, you have around about a 77% chance. But the problem is that that is pretty high, right? But still 23% of your maps are basically gone. They're converted to Orb of Transmutations or Orb of Alchemies or whatever. And while you may not want to run those, they might still be anywhere from 3 to 6 chaos depending on what those maps are. And a lot of times, even then, this 77% chance will just not be enough to sustain on its own. So yeah, you're destroying 23% of your maps. You're destroying Cortexes, you're destroying other synthesized maps, you're destroying shaper maps. But when is singular focus actually really good? Well, as you can see here, I'm running it right now, so I'm just going to give you an example of what I'm running right now. Full Atlas guide is going to come out soon. But basically what I'm doing here is I'm ping-ponging between glacier and marshes. Now, what ping-ponging refers to is I'm not just running one map, I have a second map that I can sometimes run to get back glaciers. And this works because they're connected maps, right? Not only do you have these small nodes on the Atlas passive tree, which give you a ton of chance, in my case, even more because I have Wandering Path, which doubles the effectiveness of these nodes. Not only will I have, in my case, 100% chance to, at some point in the map, right, drop that connected map. That is guaranteed, right? I also have a chance to duplicate it, stuff like that. But on top of that, every single boss also has a fixed chance to drop a connected map. And in this case, if I run marshes, I only have 3 connected maps. They each have a weighting of 1, but if I have them in the favorite slots, connected maps do use the favoring system. I have like 11 times glacier, so the chance that I don't drop a glacier are basically 0. So in this case, singular focus makes a lot of sense because in this case, you're not really going to drop any maps that aren't glacier or that aren't marshes, right? Because they're next to each other. But what if you want to sustain one map and one map only? Well, either you juice your map like crazy and you still run singular focus and you just completely ignore it, right? If it's a tier 16, but if it's a T15 or a T14, what you can do is shadow shipping. So this keystone says maps cannot be your favorite maps, which on first glance looks pretty dumb or interesting, but pretty weak, right? The second line we're completely going to ignore, right? You can get special implicits. They aren't really that important. They're not what we're looking for right here. Maps cannot be found, found cannot be your favorite maps. Now, how can this work? Well, there's nothing saying that you have to use all your watchstones. So for example, in my last strategy video, what I did is I actually ran with 2 watchstones. So what this lets me do is if I now look at tier 15s, because there is now tier 15s, there's not that many out there, right? So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tier 15s in total. So if we use the shadow shaping keystone, we can favor all of the maps we don't want. Let's say we want desert only, right? We're going to favor here all the maps we do not want to drop. We don't favor desert, right? But all the other maps, so only desert is actually left as our T15, which does not mean that the other maps, whenever they would drop, just get swallowed. No, it means that whenever a T15 would drop, it gets converted to the only viable option, which in this case is desert. And by the way, this works for most, basically all the tiers below tier 16. The problem with tier 16s is just that there's too many, right? You could remove all watchstones and then there's only like this amount of tier 16s, but at that point, you might as well use Orb of Horizons because all of these can be Orb of Horizon into. Now, whereas singular focus rather is really, really good in terms of juicing, right? Where you have very, very long and juicy maps. Stuff like shadow shaping is extremely good if you don't want to juice your maps too much, right? It doesn't give you that many maps, but it gives you exactly surgically the maps that you want. So for example, in stuff like Alchent Go, right? Downgrading your map from a 16 to 15 doesn't really cost you anything. And so if it's like down below here on the Atlas, you can play around with this. This works with 3 watchstones. This works with 1 watchstone, right? You just have to look at the tiers and what you have to block. In that case, for Alchent Go playstyle, for example, this keystone is incredible. Number 2 is quantity on your map. And I want to distinguish this a little bit because there's a difference between quantity on your map and quantity on your gear. So if we look at this map here, it says item quantity 75. And this gets added by everything you have on your Atlas passive tree or whatever corresponding things you put into your map device. But what I want to make clear is Stuff like this, quantity that you get from your items, do not increase your map drops, only the quantity from your map itself. Which is why not only should you look at the quantity that you have on your map, you should also be looking to chisel your map. Now, usually it's kind of a question whether you should chisel, right? 20 quant is really good, but they can be expensive at times. But this league, altars are just printing them like crazy. So for a chaos, one chaos, you get 12.5 chisels, which means you can give 3 different maps 20 quantity. So that's a total of 60 quantity for chaos. So you not chiseling this league is absolutely criminal. Get yourself the chisels. Don't be lazy. Number 1, right? Number 2, through Atlas passive. So if we look at the Atlas passive, there are not only the quantity nodes here and in the middle, right? For a total of 15%, or, which we're going to talk about Wandering Spirit, 30 actually. There's also the map effect modifiers, right? Which basically just means that the upper things up here, right? Item quantity, item rarity, pack size, all gets enhanced, but the negative nodes on the map also do, right? So the map's going to be harder, but you're going to get more quantity, more pack size, more rarity. Also, once again, you have these small nodes that duplicate your maps or give you a chance to duplicate your map. You have these, which basically say that you will drop a map from an adjacent map, right? And this can go up to 100% where you guaranteed get one, which all leads me to one of the most underrated keystones in this game currently, Wandering Path. 100% increased effect of small Atlas passives with the downside of notables being disabled. Now, for some strategies, this can be insane because when it comes to map sustain, all these small nodes basically give you map sustain. The quantity does, the effect of modifiers does, the duplication does, the guaranteed map does. And I have a good feeling we're going to be talking about this notable a lot more soon. But basically what I want to point out, all of these small nodes come together to help you sustain. Now then, let's not forget fragments, right? If you sometimes just have randomly dropped fragments, you can just throw them into your map device with the map giving you 5% quant per fragment you put in. And at the end, and this is probably the most important one out of all, is use your Sentinels. Your Sentinels empower enemies, and it doesn't just give whatever it says on the Sentinel, it also just empowers the amount of drops that they have, giving you more map drops, considerably more map drops. Now let's move on to number 3 though, which is pack size. Now pack size you can basically imagine as just more monsters in your map, which basically is like a more multiplier to your quantity that you already have. Because you could have all the quantity in the world. If your map only has 10 monsters, probably not that good, right? If your map has 1,000 monsters, very good, because each one of those the quantity will apply on. Now, pack size is one of the hardest things to actually get in this game in terms of just raw pack size, because it is a very strong multiplier. But what can you do to get more monsters in your maps? Number 1, league mechanics, right? You can get them from scarabs. You can get them from the Atlas passive tree. You know the drill. Stuff like Legion, Breach, Blight, Harbinger is very good for map sustain, right? Stuff like that will prolong your map, but it will provide you more mobs. You can also straight up get pack size from the Atlas passive tree. Now, number 1, from this new keystone here, Grand Design, which I would stay away from if you don't have something very specific you want to do, but also just these small nodes here once again. And that is why so many top tier players are using all of these, even if they're not pathing anywhere. They're just like taking straight up all of these small nodes, and it is kind of confusing, right? But it is huge, right? For example, if I took all of these nodes, now let's say we did not have Wandering Path and we had a normal build. If you added all of these together, we would have 30 effect of modifiers on your non-unique maps. Which, if we look here, if we had a 21 monster pack size, if we do 21 times 0.3, we would get an extra 6. It would be rounded down 6% pack size, which doesn't sound like much, but just forget that this gets multiplied by all the quantity that you already have, right? Not only that, you also get XP, right? And gem XP. So it's straight up stronger than quantity in the same amount. Now, you can also do Shaping the Valleys, which a lot of people do, right? Straight up 10% quant, 10% rarity, 10% pack size, just for using Fortune Favors the Brave. So this is really, really good for builds who don't really need anything specific here. You can just put on Fortune Favors the Brave, which gives you a random outcome. Sometimes it will hit something good, sometimes you won't. But just paying free chaos for straight up 10 quant, 10 pack size, and 10 rarity is insane. And if you're running Conqueror maps, obviously there's Martial Forces, which is why a lot of people last league ran a lot of Conqueror maps and why they were so expensive. You straight up get 20% pack size from just one node, but it only counts for Conqueror maps. And we have once again your Sentinel. Now, if you look at your Sentinel tree here, if you're using the red or the blue Sentinel, right? There are two nodes that I want to bring your attention to. Stalker Sentinels have a 10% chance to duplicate non-unique enemies when they're empowered. Whenever you're zapping an enemy, there's a 1 in 10 chance that that enemy gets duplicated, also being able to drop everything. And on top of that, you also have Pandemonium Sentinels spawn packs of monsters on deployment, which, if you also have Pandemonium Sentinels can be deployed an additional time, means that just by taking this node, you get 2 packs of monsters on top of whatever you have in your map, basically giving you free pack size. And then at the end, something I love to throw in, especially now with the changes, is a Elder Scarab. So if you missed this in the patch notes, you can now apply one of these influences and an Elder or Shaper Scarab on top. And Elder Scarabs are just huge, right? You have these portals, which just absolutely shit out maps, right? Sometimes you have these annoying mobs that kind of slow you down, sure. But overall, Elder maps are really, really strong for sustain, and I feel like something that's a little bit underrated. And that's mostly because, unlike League mechanics that make your map longer, these are just straight up mobs, right? You don't have to like follow an Abyss or wait for the Legion or wait for the Breach. Those are just mobs, extra mobs you get in your map that don't slow you down. Also from the future here, something I forgot to point out in the pack size section that is really, really strong are Sextants. Now, I already talked highly about pack size and why it's so good, and this will already get you the gist of why Sextants are usually so expensive. Now, this league, however, if you look at the price, right, we go here, we go to the Sextant for Chaos, you will see that there's actually a different picture. Usually these cost like upwards 3 to 4 Chaos. This patch, however, they're more like 2 Chaos, and that's mostly because altars are just spawning them like crazy, right? They're called map currency, basically. And they're just dropping like crazy, just like chisels. And what these do, right, if you apply them, is a lot of the effects of Sextants will be more mobs, right? For example, this one not, but this one gives you more rare mobs. That's more maps, right? This one gives you Rogue Exiles, doesn't do much. Strong boxes, right? Gives you an extra strong box, gives the mobs more quantity. That is potentially more maps, right? Now, there's lightning damage monsters, fire damage monsters, chaos, all sorts of monsters, right? Which are also more packs to add and multiply your quantity. Now, Sextants are almost always worth it, and that is especially true if you know how to use these here, Surveyor's Compass. So if you don't know, there is people who sit in their hideout all day and all they do is roll Sextants. And then with the Surveyor's Compass, you can store that Sextant and then you can sell it to other players. Now, it just depends on what you get, right? For example, what I usually do is I do like half of it. I run Sextants, right? But whenever I see a Sextant that's worth more to other people, I remove it, right? And I just run stuff like the normal mob types, right? That just enhance my map. And stuff like Sacred Grove, Delirium, Strong Boxes. Beyond those, I sell to players who will pay premium for it. And then I'll give you some small other tips that didn't really fit into any other category. Number one, Cartography Scarabs. Oh my god, Cartography Scarabs are so damn good, and they are just consistently underpriced. Now, if you search for Cartography Scarabs in bulk right now, they cost around about 1.7 chaos per. And I don't think people really understand just how crazy they are in terms of what they let you sustain. Now, some strats you would really want the polished cartography. Usually you don't want the gilded one, but the rusted one is just really strong to just throw in whenever. Maybe you drop the random one from an altar. Maybe you just have it. Maybe you have a little bit of money and you try to invest. This will be one of your best bets. If you just drop a single T16 map, that means that you already got your money back, right? And usually it will be way more. Also because mostly everybody has some amount of these nodes right here. And then every map that drops gets even more multiplied, right? Because now it has a chance to also get duplicated. So I currently do not know a strategy where a Cartography Scarab will not at least get you back your money. And especially when we talk about stuff like Singular Focus, where some of your maps will just get eaten alive, but you hyper focus on the ones that you need. This could give you the small push that you need to actually completely self-sustain. Then probably the biggest tip, honestly, get your Washstones favorite slots, right? So Washstones, per Washstone here, right? Per Washstone here, you get 25% chance for your maps to be 1 tier higher. Now, you might think this is useless if all your maps are already tier 16s, right? but the game has a sort of system that is called a map equity system. And without going too much into detail on it, Grimbro has a very nice in-depth video about it. This basically means that whenever there would be a tier 14 dropping, and it can't drop because there's no tier 14 on your Atlas, it will count towards the next chance to get a tier 16. So behind the scenes, basically the game is calculating into your next tier 16 map drop, and every small map that can't drop will accumulate to that the higher it is, right, with this one tier higher. And this also goes for the Atlas passives right here, right? The small ones, shaping the valleys, shaping the seas, all of these are crucial for map sustain. And we already talked about the favored slots extensively, right? They're really, really strong. They give you weighting to the maps that you want, and they make it less likely that you get maps that you don't want. So if there's bosses that you just cannot do and you cannot unlock these favored slots, I would seriously consider buying a carry, just because see it as a sort of investment for the rest of the league, just giving you an upside for a long period of time. And then just a small thing at the end is, if you are okay with running a secondary map, that is insane. At that point, there is going to be no problem for you to sustain, and that is basically called ping pong. So for example, once again, what I'm doing is Glacier is the map I want to run. And usually if I run 100 Glaciers, I will get back around about 80, right? What that means is at some point I'm going to run out of Glaciers. But the thing is, I am getting so many connected map drops, right? And since I favored one marshes here, that means that I'm almost never dropping a terrace, right? So I'm going to drop a ton of marshes. So what I can say is, after I run out of Glaciers, I can now do like 100 marshes, and I'm going to get probably back like 120 Glaciers, and we're back to round one. So if you ever thought about why when you run a map, you have so many of the connected maps and so much less of the other ones, that is because of these small nodes right here, which basically every Atlas has. Also, they can then get duplicated, right? And on top of that, the map boss also has a chance to drop a connected map only. So whenever you look at your strat and you think, well, is there actually a good connected map, right? You can look at stuff like, I don't know, Strand Park seems pretty good, right? You can look around. You can say Tropical Islands. Lair is not that bad of a map. I'm just going to run Tropical Islands until I run out of it. Then I do some layers and we're back to normal. If you follow the other steps, that should not be necessary usually, but in some strats it still is, because you just don't have that many mobs, right? And sometimes you just get unlucky. And you know the drill. Sometimes you go into a map and you drop 5 back. Sometimes you go into 5 maps in a row and you get 0 back. So what are the most important takeaways from this video? Well, number one, it is important that you have a good mixture of quantity and pack size, right? You can have the most quantity that you want, right? You can take all the quant nodes here. You can chisel your maps and whatnot. But if you don't actually have any content to play within your maps, well, that quantity will not be applied to anything. And in reverse, you can have Legion, you can have Breach, you can have Blight. It doesn't matter if you don't have the quant to back it up, if you don't reroll your map sometimes if the quant is too low, if you don't chisel, if you don't take nodes like these or understand how strong these map modifier effect nodes are, you will bleed map sustain. So I'm not going to bullshit you, right? There's no number. You want this amount of quantity and this amount of pack size. It's something you have to test out for every single strategy you do. Hopefully some of the things I said in this video can give you some pointers on that. Then next up, keystones, use them, right? There's a lot of them now. There is singular focus, there's shadow shipping, and furthermore, for a little bit more advanced players, there's also grand design and wandering path. I would say for all of those, I would basically say the same. Don't use them if you don't know exactly what you're doing, because their downsides can completely screw over what you're doing. But if you do know how to use them, and if you watched videos or you tried it out yourself, then you will definitely sustain maps better. Also, do use currencies and fragments. I know a lot of people who are very wary of investing into their maps, but I can just tell you from personal experience, they will usually always pay for themselves. And whether you see that or not, right? It is what it is. You put fragment into your map. You don't know, did that map just drop because I put that extra fragment in or not? You will never know, but over time, the established norm is that if you invest into your map, you get it back. And there's a reason for that, because usually the juicier your map, the greater the returns, and it all multiplies off of each other. And at the end, I just have to say this, don't give up too fast, problem solve, right? I put out my Atlas guides. I play with that Atlas strat like 50 hours on stream, right? I know a lot of people on YouTube don't watch my stream. I get it. But it's all there, right? It works. It is airtight. And then I put it out and there's people who just cannot sustain. Just be aware that the problem is somewhere in your setup. There's some tiny thing you're doing wrong and that can completely change everything. interesting. That's why I always make these very long-winded videos, right? I get it. You just want to grab the Atlas tree and just keep going. I get it. You want to play, but there's a reason why I make these videos so long. I want to go in depth, and there's a lot of moving parts in there. And I guess you're at the end as well. Use this video as a toolbox, right? I talked about a lot of small things. Some you already know, some you don't. Whenever you're thinking about a new strat that you want to try out, maybe come back, maybe you find something that you missed that can apply to your strategy. But overall, I hope the video could help you out, and see you next time. But that's it for the video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, subscribe. As always, a huge shout out to my Twitch subscribers and my Patreons. I couldn't do videos like this without you. Thank you so much for the support. And yeah, I just thought I had to push this video out. There's going to be another Atlas strat coming soon about the tree I'm currently running on stream over on twitch.tv/Palsteron, right? And yeah, we're gonna see what happens. Also, new build guide coming out soon. Hope you guys are having a lot of fun with the league now that it has been maybe fixed up a little bit more. But with that being said, since I still don't have a slogan, see you next time.